Legend of the Galactic Heroes, Volume 1 The Star Crusher. O Zarathustra, thou stone of wisdom, thou catapult stone, thou crusher of stars, thou hast hurled thyself high into the sky. But where is the place where the stone, once thrown, does not fall back? At last, to return to thyself, to kill thyself with the stone thou hast thrown, condemned to such a fate. O Zarathustra, thou hast cast the stone so far, yet in the end it shall fall back upon thy head. Friedrich Nietzsche. Prologue. An outline of the history of the galaxy. It was in AD 2801 that humanity declared the formation of the Galactic Federation and relocated the crux of its political authority from Terra, the third planet of the solar system, to Theoria, the second planet of the Aldebaran system. In the same year, humanity reset its calendar to Space Era 1 and began to expand inexorably into the inner reaches and frontiers of the galaxy. After the wars and the chaos that had been so starkly characteristic of the 2700s, which had brought development of space to a standstill, the energy that came bursting forth was all the more explosive. Subspace jump theory, gravitational control, and inertial control technology. These were the three graces that made interstellar flight possible, and they were refined day by day as humankind spurred its starships toward unknown horizons, and set sail upon oceans brimming with stars. Onward, and onward still. These were the familiar words to the people of those days. It was plain to see that the consciousness of the human race itself had entered a period of exuberance. And so, with a resolute will and a dazzling passion, humanity grappled with every difficulty that came its way. Even in the face of great hardships, it didn't indulge in the consolations of pessimism. Instead, it overcame obstacles with good cheer. Humanity in that age was what might perhaps have been called a legion of hopeless optimists. A golden age, overflowing with enterprise and renewal. Perhaps. But although that period may well have been described in such terms, it does not mean that its veneer was without a number of scratches. Foremost among these was the existence of interstellar pirates. These were the malformed progeny of privateers that had once been employed by Terra and Sirius when they battled for dominance in the 2700s. Among these pirates were a number of individuals who stole from the rich, gave to the poor, and sang the praises of freedom. They, and their battles with the Federal Navy that pursued them, provided endless fodder for 3D Solivision programs. The facts, however, were more prosaic. The majority of these pirates were nothing more than criminal syndicates, colluding with corrupt politicians and businessmen in order to collect and consume ill-gotten gains. For the people who lived on the frontier worlds in particular, they were nothing less than a Pandora's box of troubles. Naturally, they often haunted the shipping lanes connecting the outlying systems. Starships just put into service were destroyed, deliveries of supplies were delayed, and what goods did make it to their destinations were exorbitantly priced, since the cost of protection money was being piled onto the original prices. The seriousness of this problem cannot be underestimated. As the dissatisfaction and uncertainty mounted, confidence in the Federation's ability to govern was eroded, and the result was an eroding of the people's enthusiasm for developing the frontier. In Space Era 106, the government finally put forth a serious effort to eliminate the pirates, and thanks to the efforts of Admirals M. Schufrin and C. Wood, this objective had been all but achieved 2 years later. It was by no means easy. As Admiral Wood, known for his sharp tongue, later wrote in his memoirs, "I had competent enemies in front of me, incompetent allies behind me, and had to fight with both of them at once. Hell, I wasn't even entirely sure I could count on myself." After Admiral Wood moved into the world of politics, he was known as that insensitive, stubborn old geezer who waged a tireless, tenacious war against corrupt politicians and business people. These societal diseases continued to flare up without interruption. However, they were, if we consider the whole of humanity as a single individual, really nothing more than the equivalent of minor skin irritations. There is no way to prevent them completely, just as it is impossible to fully eliminate abrasions to one's skin. But as long as proper treatment is applied, there is no reason at all for such ailments to lead to a patient's death. And so it was that without ascending the operating table, humanity continued on in mostly good health for the next 2 centuries. Left behind by this prosperity and development was Terra, once the suzerain of all humanity. The planet had already been scoured for every last bit of its resources, suffering the loss of both its real and potential political and economic power. Its population had plummeted, leaving it nothing more than a used-up and useless old state relying on faded traditions. Its sovereignty still recognized, just barely, thanks to its harmlessness. The interstellar colonies that Terra had wrested from Sirius and others, the accumulated wealth it had possessed during the days when it still dominated the galaxy, all had been lost somewhere along the way. And so at last the cancerous cells began to multiply, and the shadow of a so-called medieval stagnation fell across the face of human society. The hearts and minds of the people came not to be ruled by hope and ambition, but by exhaustion and weariness. Activity, optimism, and initiative gave way to passivity, pessimism, and protectionism. In the fields of science and technology, new discoveries and inventions ground to a halt. The democratically elected government of the Republic lost its ability to maintain self-discipline, and declined into an oligarchy interested in nothing but concessions and political infighting. Plans for the development of the frontier regions were scrapped. The potential bounty of countless habitable worlds was forsaken, along with half-constructed facilities that were left abandoned. Social lifestyles and cultures steadily decayed. People lost sight of their proper values and gave themselves over to drug abuse, alcoholism, promiscuity, and mysticism. Crime rates skyrocketed, while arrest rates fell in inverse proportion. The tendency to make little of human life and to ridicule morality grew increasingly pronounced. Of course, there were many who lamented these phenomena, who could not stand to sit idly by while humanity in its decadence marched toward the same miserable fate that had awaited the dinosaurs. They believed that drastic treatment of humanity's collective illness was needed, and in this they were not mistaken. But when they selected their favored form of medication, the majority opted not for the kind of long-term therapy that requires endurance and perseverance. Instead, They quaffed a fast-acting elixir that came with many side effects. This was the powerful drug called dictatorship. And so the stage was set for the ascent of Rudolf von Goldenbaum. Rudolf von Goldenbaum was born into a military family in space era 268, and just as one would expect, he entered the military service as well. While at the Space Force's officer school, he was the very picture of a top-ranked student. With a powerful body 196 centimeters in height and weighing in at 99 kilograms, people who saw him often had the feeling that they were gazing up at a steel tower. Von Goldenbaum's towering form contained not a trace of fat, nor the slightest hint of vulnerability. He received his commission as an ensign at age 20, and was attached to a guard unit patrolling the Rigel shipping lanes as its legal affairs officer. There he applied himself to the enforcement of military discipline, driving out the four evils of alcohol, gambling, drugs, and homosexuality. Even when these problems entangled his superior officers, he showed no mercy, pursuing them with unassailable logic and regulations brandished high. His embarrassed senior officers responded by promoting him to lieutenant junior grade, then transferring him out toward Beltegus. This was a dangerous region, often called the Space Pirates' Main Street, but Rudolf von Goldenbaum went into it in high spirits. In time, the pirate syndicate there was driven to destruction by his ingenious and unsparing attacks, bearing witness to the shrewd ways of he who came to be called the Second Coming of Admiral Wood. Von Goldenbaum's enthusiasm for ferocity, even those who wished to surrender and face trial were incinerated along with their ships, was, naturally, a target of some criticism, but the voices praising his escapades were far louder. The citizens of the Galactic Federation knew well the suffocating feeling of life as part of a generation that was going nowhere, and they joyfully welcomed the young and spirited new hero. Rudolph's appearance came like a shining supernova to a world that had been enshrouded in thick fog. In space era 296, Rudolf von Goldenbaum, who had made Rear Admiral at age 28, resigned from the military and entered the political arena, winning a seat in Parliament. When he became leader of a political party called the National Reformation Alliance, he brought in many young politicians by virtue of his popularity. By the time a few more election cycles had passed, von Goldenbaum's power had grown by leaps and bounds, and amid a complex brew of fervent support, uncertainty, opposition, and decadent unconcern, he succeeded in building a firm political foundation. He was elected prime minister by popular vote, and then, by exploiting vague wording in the constitutional article that banned holding multiple offices simultaneously, was also appointed head of state by Parliament. It had been an unwritten rule that no individual should hold more than one office at a time. These two positions possessed only limited powers alone, but when both were united in the person of a single individual, a fearsome chemical reaction took place. Now there was essentially no one left who could stand in the way of Rudolf von Goldenbaum's political power. As historian D. Sinclair would write a generation later, von Goldenbaum's ascension was striking historical evidence that, fundamentally, people do not prefer independent thought and the accompanying responsibility, but rather orders, subordination, and the accompanying exemption from responsibility. In a popular democracy, the masses who elect unfit rulers are to blame for bad government, but that is not the case in a monarchy. Rather than reflecting upon their own mistakes, the people are free to enjoy speaking ill of leaders who are even more irresponsible than they. Regardless of his theory's validity or lack thereof, it is certain that the people of von Goldenbaum's generation were on his side. Strong, strong government, powerful leaders, order and revitalization. Somewhere along the way, the young, powerful leader who had cried out these slogans came to be a dictator called Administrator for Life, and he did not permit the existence of any criticism. By Space Era 310, when he attained the title of Sacred and Inviolable Emperor of the Galactic Empire, not a few citizens found themselves cursing their stupidity for failing to learn the lessons of history. As for those who had been consistently critical all along, no one could blame them for feeling deeply resentful. But the numbers shouting for joy had been so much greater. Hassan el-Said, one of the politicians of the Republican faction of that time, wrote the following in his diary on the day of the coronation. Here in my room, I can hear the crowds outside shouting, "Hail Rudolph!" I wonder how many days they'll need to realize that they're cheering their own hangman. The publication of the diary was later suppressed by the imperial authorities. It was also on this day that the space era calendar was abolished, and the first year of the imperial calendar was begun. Here the Galactic Federation collapsed, and the Galactic Empire and the Goldenbaum dynasty were born. It cannot be doubted that this man, who as Emperor Rudolph I of the Galactic Empire had become the first absolute monarch of the political system uniting all humanity, was possessed of extraordinary talents. With the boundless strength of his political leadership and the fortitude of his will, he enforced discipline, improved the efficiency of government, and purged corrupt officials. This was all according to standards which Rudolph set himself, but the vulgar, decadent, fallen, and unhealthy way of life and entertainment vanished, and the rates of crime and juvenile delinquency plummeted in the face of severe, even cruel, judicial activism. In any case, the evil that had enshrouded society was blown away. And yet, the steel giant, as some like to refer to Rudolph, was still not satisfied. His idolized society was one with a high degree of unity, regulated and managed in an orderly fashion by powerful leaders. For Rudolph, who relied greatly on himself and had utmost faith in the justice that he himself executed, critics and opponents were nothing but foreign contaminants disrupting the unity and order of society. As a natural consequence, the cruel suppression of opposition forces began. In year 9 of the imperial calendar, this created the opportunity for the Genetic Inferiority Elimination Act to be promulgated. The strong consume the weak, the fittest survive. Excellence is victorious, while inferiority is defeated. This is the providence of the universe. So Rudolph expressed his beliefs to his subjects. Human society is no exception. When the number of aberrations exceeds a critical mass, society loses its vitality and declines into weakness. My ardent desire is for humanity's everlasting prosperity. Therefore, the elimination of those elements that would weaken humanity as a species is my holy obligation as ruler of humanity. Specifically, this meant forced sterilization for the physically handicapped, those below the poverty line, and those who did not excel. It meant euthanasia. It meant euthanasia for the mentally handicapped. It meant that societal measures for the support of the weak were all but eliminated. For Rudolph, weakness was the unforgivable sin, and the weaker members of society who use their weakness as a shield, then demand to be taken care of, were nothing more than objects of his hatred. When this bill was shown to the people, even the throngs that had thus far worshipped and followed Rudolph blindly were ashamed of themselves, as might be expected. The number of those who could confidently declare themselves to be superior beings was not so great. Everyone was thinking, isn't this a little too high-handed? Politicians of the all but vanished Republican faction still hung on in Parliament, and they gave voice to the will of the people, lambasting the Emperor. To this, the Emperor determined to make a decisive counterstrike. He immediately and permanently dissolved the Parliament. The following year, the Imperial Ministry of the Interior created the Bureau for the Maintenance of Public Order, which came to wield fierce power against political crime. Ernst Faustrom, who was Minister of the Interior as well as a close associate of Rudolph's, ran the bureau himself, arresting, incarcerating, imprisoning, and punishing, not according to law, but according to his own judgment. Such was the unholy matrimony of authority and violence. These two soon gave birth to the infant known as state terrorism, which grew in no time to be a giant that engulfed all of human society. At that time, a blackly humorous joke was making the rounds. If you don't want to be executed, don't get arrested by the police. Get yourself caught by public order instead, because they don't execute anybody. It is a fact that of all those whom the Bureau arrested for political and thought crimes, not a single one was ever formally executed. However, those who were shot dead without trial, who died under torture, who were disappeared to barren penal asteroids, who were left disabled by lobotomies or massive doses of drugs, who died in prison of illnesses or accidents. The combined tally of these climbed to 4 billion. But because this number was only 1.3% of the Galactic Empire's total population of 300 billion, the Bureau was able to spuriously claim, "We have eliminated a handful of dangerous elements for the sake of the absolute majority." Of course, that absolute majority did not include the 4 billion who shuddered in fear for their fates, or the countless others who swallowed their objections amid the oppressive silence. Rudolph crushed those who opposed him, and at the same time selected and granted special privileges to certain people of superior ability, creating an aristocracy to support the imperial family. But was it a sign of the inferiority of Rudolph's own knowledge that all of them were white people who bore old Germanic family names? Based on his strong service record, Faustrom also received the title of Count, but on his way home he ran into a terror attack carried out by an underground Republican group. In the flash of a neutron bomb, he met a tragic end. Rudolph mourned, and with the execution of 20,000 suspects, he sought to comfort the soul of one who had served him well. In the 42nd year of the imperial calendar, Rudolph's life of 83 years came to an end. It was said that his huge frame had been stronger than ever, but psychological distress had cast a heavy burden on his heart. The emperor did not die in full satisfaction. Of the 4 children he and his Empress Elizabeth had, all were girls, and he was left without a male heir. Late in life, his concubine Magdalena gave birth to a baby boy, but it is said that the child was born an idiot. Of this episode, the public records of the empire are silent, but we may surmise that the rumors circulating at the time were almost certainly true, because not just Magdalena, but also her parents, her siblings, and even the doctors and nurses who had attended her birth were afterward all put to death. It must have come as a stinging blow for Rudolph, who had promulgated the Genetic Inferiority Elimination Act and sought the development of a superior form of humanity. For Rudolph, the gene decided everything, and to prevent the collapse of his belief system, Magdalena had to die. It simply could not be that Emperor Rudolph had a genetic makeup that produced retardation. The fault had to lie completely with Magdalena. After the death of Rudolph, the imperial crown of the Galactic Empire came to rest upon the head of Sigismund, eldest son of Rudolph's eldest daughter, Katharina. And so at the age of 25, with the assistance of his father Joachim, Lord of New Staufen, this young emperor came to rule the galaxy.